All right, I'm back. Going to do a couple videos about Napoleon, but today I want to look at, why is Napoleon so dominant? He runs rings around his opponents, even at the end of his career when he wasn't quite as sharp. I believe largely because his physical health was starting to fail him, but he's still the best general on the field. And whether you get into military affairs or aren't that interested, I got to tell you, Napoleon stands out as one of the top captains in world history. He's up there in the same class as Alexander the Great and Genghis Khan. He's an amazing commander, and most Americans would probably name him as their most famous Frenchman, which is kind of ironic because he was not born French. He was from Corsica, which was only recently acquired by France when he was born in 1769. So, maybe technically he was born French, but by birth he's closer to an Italian. He always spoke French with an accent. He's kind of an outsider, and I don't want to go too far with this because I have more a biography sketch video to do, but I want to talk about why he's awesome. So let's take a look. He's somebody that leaders who followed him wanted to be him, and they tried to emulate the things he did. Of course, mostly no one's been able to militarily dominate the way that he did and politically dominate the way that he did. Some people try to mention Napoleon and Hitler in the same sentence, but to me, there's really no comparison. Hitler is a completely different kind of animal that we have to look at another time. But let's take a look here. What makes Napoleon special? Some of the things are things about him, and some of the things are things about his position. So let's check it out. First of all, I've got leadership talents and practices. And these are things that any leader could develop, but Napoleon had developed them to a very high degree. He's a motivator. He's a great speaker. And he's self-taught. My favorite is when he's standing there in front of the pyramids and monuments of Egypt before his troops go into battle, and he says, "Soldiers, 40 centuries look down on you." And that's just, what a ringing phrase. But this sort of thing is very motivational. And he's somebody who, he's that coach. If you had that coach who could just convince the whole team to put their heads down and just run through the wall, he's that guy. He wins the loyalty of his subordinates, from the highest marshal all the way down to the lowest private. He would promote people based on their merit. What was merit for Napoleon? He didn't care who your daddy was. He didn't care that you were the 6th generation in the military. He didn't care where you came from. He didn't care that you were the smartest guy in the class. He cared about your ability to perform. If you were successful, if you were a man of action and aggression, and you were able to pull it off, you were going to get a promotion. And so these are the people that, some of them under the old military systems of Europe before the French Revolution, they would have never been promoted. But under Napoleon, they can rise to the top. He awards his soldiers down to the lowest privates. They can all win the Legion of Honor. You don't have to be an officer or a nobleman's son. You can be, a raw recruit, but you can win this medal. And these guys would march for Napoleon, fight and die for Napoleon. He is able to trust these people that he puts in positions of power and authority. He doesn't micromanage. Certainly, he gives them orders, but he has promoted them for a reason. He trusts and believes in their talent, and he turns them loose. Sometimes they let him down, but very, very often they pull off moves as brilliant as his. And this developing of a team of subordinates who will carry out this sort of aggressive actions that he wanted and the daring that he wanted. He's almost matchless in that. In American history, you look at the Civil War, Robert E. Lee built a leadership team kind of like that. Let's see here. I'm going to move on to the next thing here. Unique things about Napoleon. Napoleon, if you want to be Napoleon, you want to develop your leadership, that's great. But in order to really be a top-ranked military leader, you got to have some of these things. He had a map in his head. The geography of Europe, the territory of the area he was fighting in, he just knew the rocks and the rivers and the hills and the forests. It's all in there. And he also knew and understood the movements of the troops, not only his own, but his opponents, where they were, how strong they were, what direction they're going in, their morale. He had an incredible intelligence service as well. But anyway, the map is in his head, and he's able to use this mastery of geography, both in a large scale, but also on the particular battlefield. He's just matchless in this. He can then take these battlefield maps and situation maps and assess them with frightening speed. The speed of thought, it reminds me of a chess master playing multiple opponents at once. He just goes table to table to table, assesses the board, moves, and then moves on to the next game, and will win those games because he's the chess master, and one of the things he does is assess those positions so quickly. Napoleon had that same talent. His genius at being able to concentrate forces, one of the things about Napoleon's wars, they're so much larger than wars of the 18th century, and this is courtesy of the French Revolution and the massive conscript armies that are built first by France but then by other powers. But he's got columns and units spread all over the map, and when it comes time to fight, though, you must concentrate them, and he's a master at that. He's able to bring them together. We see the same talent in Genghis Khan, covering vast distances, different columns, bringing them together at the right moment to concentrate against an enemy. He personally has massive energy. Nobody can keep up with him. He's up earlier and stays up later. He doesn't need much sleep. He gets prodigious amounts of work done, and then he's ready to go play. Nobody is able to match his pace. I think it's one of the things that happened to him as he gets older. His star burned so hot and so bright, it's like he aged faster. And, I can't prove that, but I think that that's one of the things about him. And, by the time he's in middle age, he's starting to slow down. For sure, some of his competitors are getting better, but it seems that he's starting to slow down. Some of the old energy, certainly some of the health, is not quite there anymore. And his ability to just show massive energy does fade a little over time. Still, even at the end of his career, he's the best general on the field. And he shows flashes of brilliance that are just unbelievable in his last campaigns. But all the same, he's also sometimes sidelined because he's a little sick and not able to keep the same pace anymore. So anyway, massive energy. And this is something we see from other great captains in the past as well. He's diligent. He studies his opponents. He studies their strengths. He studies his own army. He knows what team he's putting on the court, and he knows what team the opponent is putting on the court. He studies military history. He's very widely read. He was bullied as a kid, and he devoted himself to books. He didn't have that many friends, but he sure was well educated. And partly it's because he took the business of education into his own hands, and he knew what he wanted to study, and he made himself an expert at it. So those are things that are a tremendous strength. He's got a memory like a steel trap. He sees a soldier, he says, "Hey, I remember what you did on such and such a day. I wish I had that as a teacher. I wish I could remember the things and the faces the way that he could. His memory is astounding. All right, moving on. He is the political leader of France, which means he could focus the resources of the French state. And France is, at least potentially, the richest state in Europe at that time. Their population was larger, the wealth of their land. Remember, this is pre-industrial times, with the exception of Britain, which is just starting into the Industrial Revolution. He's the master of the richest, most populous land. If he can just focus that energy, well, he can. He can focus the energy. And the constraints of the past are gone. Louis XIV could focus the energy of France too, but Louis XIV had the nobility and the church to work around. He doesn't have these handicaps. He's able to focus the powers of the French state. He understands the power of the press. He understands that it's a new era. People are reading, or at least they're looking at the cartoons. He has newspapers that he starts. What's the job of the newspapers? Talk about Napoleon and his greatness. He is able to centralize manufacture of weapons and gunpowder. Oh, and he's able to encourage education, because to make gunpowder, you need saltpeter, which is, that's a chemical process. You can do it the hard way, but if you start developing chemistry and chemists, they're going to be able to crank out lots more gunpowder for you. And he rewards the merchants and the businessmen and the scientists and the thinkers and the intellectuals who kind of move these things around for him, just as much as he is able to reward his soldiers. So he can focus those resources. He can focus the educational resources, and he's concerned about developing an educated citizenry, because he understands that the strength of France is the citizens of France, ultimately. And so he wants to have educated citizens, but particularly the army, he wants to have officers who are educated not just with a good standard education, but also a top-notch military education. He can focus resources on that. He's aware that he is a product of the revolution, and the ideals of the revolution are things that the French now believe in. And he makes it his business to spread these ideals, or at least to talk about spreading these ideals. To be sure, you don't have quite as much freedom in Napoleon's France as you used to, but on the other hand, you don't face, sort of mayhem and random violence either. He's got things firmly in hand, and he's able to focus this state. Which brings me finally to the tool, the instrument that he uses, the French army. And the French army had grown massively under the Republic, but it also lost a lot of its professionalism, because so many of the officers were nobles and now they're gone. Well, he's going to rebuild a process that's already started. People of merit are rising to the top, people like himself. Well, this just becomes standard practice. He maintains this army at a higher state of readiness and training than most of his opponents do. Again, because he can focus the resources, and it's important to him to have this tool. This is a new kind of army. It's massive through conscription, or a draft is what we would call it in the United States. But it's also much faster than old-fashioned armies of that time, because it's not tied to a baggage train. The Revolutionary armies, they were a little disorganized. They didn't have the money to buy all the stuff that they need. They basically said, we don't need a baggage train, we'll live off the land. Well, this is his procedure at all times. His army lives off the land. It just procures what they want as they go, or takes it, or steals it, or however you want to think about that. But this is an army that can move light. Because they move light, they move much faster, which is perfect for a guy like Napoleon, who wants to get there now. He wants to get there yesterday. So this is a faster moving army than most of his competitors. It's more flexible. The old armies they reflected the old societies. You had a pecking order. Cavalry were the nobles, and then you had your artillery, the middle class, the lesser nobles, guys who were intellectuals. but then you had the foot soldiers. Well, he doesn't want any of that going on in this new post-French Revolution army. So he's got the division, which is created by the Revolutionary Army, where everything's combined. There's foot soldiers, cavalry, and artillery in the same unit, so they can be more flexible. Combined operations. And he takes divisions and puts them together to make large, he calls them corps. And a corps can function as an independent army. So he's got corps capable of fighting full-fledged battles against his enemies, moving all over the map. And they are capable of combined operations. And one of the special twists that he brings to battle, he's an artillery guy. He uses cannons in ways that nobody had before. They used to, plant a couple cannons here and a couple there with each unit, and they were defensive. He uses them offensively, and he combines them into massive grand batteries, and he'll focus all that firepower in one spot in an enemy line and just soften it up and really just crush that section of the enemy line. And that's where his attack is going to go in the area that he's softened up with the concentration of artillery. He pushes artillery forward and uses them offensively. No one had done that before, but it will be copied widely afterward. I mentioned training already keeps the army at a high state of readiness. It's part of his downfall. He loses the army in Russia, and he has to rebuild in 1813, and his army is just not at the same state of readiness. One last thing, headquarters staff. He's got a lot of intelligence pouring in about the movements of his enemies and of his own guys. It's very complicated. As brilliant as he is, he's got a staff who's gathering information and processing the information, and there are regular briefings. Now, we debate, did his staff get too large and inefficient? That's a debate for somebody else. But today I can tell you that modern militaries operate with a general staff, and staff officers are people that they form an integral part of a successful military campaign. All right, I'm gonna quit there. Things that made Napoleon awesome. See you next time.